Hey everybody, it's Eric here alongside Rod to discuss MSU's 90-85 win over the pesky Penn State Nittany Lions. Before we begin, I just want to give a brief shout out to my former foster son, Valeriano, originally from Guatemala, who became a U.S. citizen today. So we got to see that. It was a really cool ceremony with
Wow.
218 new Americans from 54 countries, from Afghanistan all the way down to Zambia. So truly A to Z. So it was really cool. If you've never seen one or gone to one, I would highly recommend it. It was very
Where
emotional too.
where did that happen?
It just happened at the Fine Arts Center here in Grand Rapids.
Okay.
They do this. They do it a couple times a year. I think they do it 3 times a year, and
Yeah.
they do it at the Gerald Ford Museum sometimes as well. So anyway,
That's
really
great.
cool.
Congrats to him. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a long process, but he's done great. So all right, so let's talk about the Spartans. As for the game, Michigan State escapes with a 5 point win despite scoring 90 points. And I think they moved to 15-2. The most important thing is to move to 15-2 overall, 6-0 in the Big Ten. Penn State drops to 12-4 and 2-5 in the league, or excuse me, 12-6 and 2-4, 2-5 in the league. And then the key things to discuss, I think, are just the poor defense, especially throughout the game, especially in the
Yeah.
second half by Michigan State. And then the other thing on a good side is the reemergence of Frankie Fiddler. I think we saw the Frankie Fiddler we thought we'd see in the beginning of the season. He finished with 18 points, 8 of 13 shooting, hit a three, missed the other three after that, but led the team in rebounding with 7, had 4 of them offensive, had 4 steals, which is a career high for him as well, to go along with his 2 assists and a turnover. So I think those are the two sort of main things out of the game that I got. There's obviously other stuff to talk about, but those are the
Yeah.
two
Well,
big ones.
let's talk about the positive side first.
Right, let's talk.
It's an
Great way to
obvious
start.
it's an obvious thing to say. It happens to be true that Michigan State doesn't win this game without Frankie Fiddler.
Right.
Um, some huge baskets. I think it was 2 putbacks in the last 5 minutes or so. And then
Hmm.
he also had an and one that he converted, where he got the ball near the rim, pump fake, kid up in the air, and converted through contact. It was it was exactly what we had thought we were going to see, maybe on a more consistent basis, in terms of his, you know, being efficient at the rim, creating contact, and I don't know what he didn't shoot a ton of free
Just
throws,
two.
but what
He
do
was
you have?
one for
Just
two.
two?
Yeah.
Okay.
Strange for him.
Um,
Yeah.
but mixed in with some perimeter shooting, he did hit the 1-3. So, and also providing, as you say, providing a real rebounding presence. That was something that we thought that he could do to really help Michigan State get better as a rebounding group this year, to give them improved rebounding by virtue of his size and his nose for the ball at the 3 spot. What was interesting in this one, because Penn State tends to go small, they don't really have a bigger option at the 4. Michigan State played, I didn't chart it, but it seemed to me that a lot of Frankie's minutes came at the 4.
They did. That's what Izzo said afterwards. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was a really nice counter in some important ways. This was a game that he could function really well at that position, and he did.
Hmm.
And they, like I said, they don't win it without him. It was huge, and great to see. What game was it? Was it the Washington game where he hit
Where
a
he hit
three?
yeah, it was a Washington game. He hit a
And we
three. Yep.
and we said, maybe we'll look back and say that was the moment that it kind of turned around for him. And he made some good contributions at Northwestern. Wasn't perfect, but made some big plays. I remember he had a big steal in that
Hmm.
game. Um, and then tonight, boy, I mean, leading scorer, leading rebounder, it doesn't get much better than that. So maybe that ended up being true, that hitting that shot kind of, even though it was just one shot, kind of opened things up for him, got his confidence going a little bit. Tonight should do nothing but help him. And boy, it couldn't come at a better time going into what looks like a huge game
Yeah.
against Illinois on Sunday. So big deal there. The other thing I would like to note as a major positive for Michigan State, and there were some others too,
Yeah.
but
Hmm.
major positive, this was a game where, now it wasn't games tied and you got the ball last possession, but it was close enough to, I think it was
It was a 3-point game
It was
at
a
the end.
3-point game.
Yeah.
Well, I think it was a 3-point. Maybe it was a 4-point game. And Jaden Akins again,
Yeah.
second time in 4 games, because he did it against Ohio State in a somewhat similar situation where you can't say it was a must score, but it kind of put the final nail in the coffin
Mm-hmm.
of the opponent. Same situation. And once again, Jaden going to the rim, finishing, and drawing a foul.
Yeah.
Nice. And he ended up with 16 points and 6 rebounds, I think. So he had a
Yeah.
good, and probably on a day where, and I'm going to get to the negative you outlined in a second because it's absolutely true. On a day where the defense, particularly the perimeter defense, was just not a whole lot of not good.
Yeah.
Jaden Akins was actually able to step up on some occasions on the defensive end too, better than anybody else. So, but a big, it should give people who are worried about that well, who will Michigan State turn to in those kind of moments? It should hopefully give those people, the team, and himself some confidence that, again, he did it in a big situation. Again, not a game winner, but I would say a game sealer, which
Yeah.
is pretty close to being just as important.
Yeah. I'd add, the other things about that. Jeremy Fears is really good the first half, especially. And I'll just talk about offensively. The team just runs very well. Although Trey Holloman also did a very good job, especially late in the
Yeah.
game.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about that game, I thought, is that Penn State would occasionally just slip into a zone for a few possessions, and it felt like every time it was the first time Michigan State had seen the zone, they really struggled. They
Yep.
really couldn't find an answer for it, and threw up some bad shots and kind of some kind of desperation threes or sort of, and then the second half, then they sort of figured out, and Jeremy was definitely much better attacking the zone than anyone else on the team.
Well,
But I also, and then I would just say the last thing is just with Fiddler. That's late in the second half when they started throwing the zone, and then he was in the lane, which we had talked about earlier. Like, if there's a perfect person to be in the lane, it's Fiddler, and now he has that confidence to go in, work through contact or whatever. And so they definitely prevented that from being a real problem, I think, late.
That zone gave them a lot more trouble than it should have, and this is what I mean by that. I am loath.
You love the zone.
No, I'm loath to on something else.
Oh.
I'm loath to criticize Tom Izzo for lineup decisions because, for the most part, I understand what he's trying to accomplish. And granted, in this game, he may have felt, well, they're gonna, they're fully capable of switching to man anyway, so they'll just do that. But
sure,
I felt that Michigan State got caught with some bad lineups out there to attack that thing, and I think that had a lot to do with the way that they struggled. Now, some of it was guards staying too horizontal and not enough vertical, but some of that was because they didn't have guys on the floor who could really handle that role in the middle. If you look at the guys who had some success, Booker had a little bit of success when he was in there. He hit one, 8-foot shot. Fiddler had some success, and I'm trying to think of anybody else. I don't recall what. I
not
don't
really.
recall
Carr
what job
kind of got
did.
one maybe.
No, but that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, right.
Carr, those are not lineups for that. You need
right.
And Cohen's improved in terms of his shooting. Could he hit an unguarded 10-footer? Maybe, but I don't. And he's a better passer than he was, but that's not enough. So I really was irritated by that watching it. That I just felt they got caught. Penn State waited, and it wasn't entirely this because some of it was score situation dictated, but it felt to me like Penn State waited until there was a lineup out there that was just not well suited to it, and Michigan State would let it go longer than it did. Now, when they solved it, they really solved it. And one key thing was, as you alluded to, one big problem early with it was settling for threes. And they stopped doing that at a certain point. We're much more effective in breaking it down. And that's what you've got to do against the zone. It's great if you can hit threes against the zone. Okay, that will work usually to bring a team out of it. But you've got the first thing you do is you look to attack it by getting to the rim, because those opportunities are there, either via the pass, or if you can get into the gaps off the dribble, you do it that way. And I thought Michigan State was not patient enough during some of those stretches to do that. And again, some of it was lineup dictated. You know, they didn't have the right guys on the floor to really effectively break it down. So anyway, that was disappointing to see. I would say defensively, that was clearly the major negative, and almost all of it had to do with the way they handled ball screens.
Yeah, they were bad.
It was whether that be via Penn State getting somebody slipping to the
Which they
rim
in the
for
first half. Yep.
unguarded layups and dunks, or allowing dribble penetration. Either was a lot of both. And Penn State shot, what did they shoot, 53%? Yeah, 53% from the floor. Well, 52.8.
Yeah.
So 53% from the floor. That's, look, you can't have that. That's got to be the high mark for the Big Ten. Might be the high mark for the season. I don't know. It's got to be close. Penn State's they're an okay shooting team from two. They're not that good. And it was really just breakdowns. And then, you know, after a lot of that happened, then you had some guys get hot from three, and they shot above what they're, you know, Dunn went crazy, and he's had a rough year. Hicks, who has been very good, was very good. That was not a surprise. Both of those guys were 4 for 7. That was the bulk of the damage. The rest of the team was 2 for 17. Sorry, 2 for 10. So it was two guys. One you would not be surprised by. The other was surprising given the way he shot on the season, though not his career. He shot better than that earlier in his career, like last season. So, but that was, you know, again, a lot of that was off mishandling pick and roll stuff. You know, they were running some pick and pop. They did some interesting. Penn State ran a lot of good stuff. I'll give them credit. They ran a lot of screening action with guards, which you don't always see. And people get fixated on all the difficulties that Michigan is causing opponents because they're running pick and roll with 2 7-footers. And fine, whatever. Yeah, there's some truth to that. But it's also something that's very hard for guards to deal with, because they're not used to being the guy hedging. They're not used to having to deal with the roll man. You know, those guys pretty much exclusively are going to be remaining up top. They're not worried about the guy rolling to the rim. And Michigan State really struggled with that in this game. So it was very disappointing. I mean, just flat out, especially in the second half. I mean, the splits are not shocking.
Torched in the second half,
43% in the first half, which is still not great.
No.
They weren't great in the first half, but they were better. But the second half, 65% is a joke.
Yeah.
That's a joke. And then the other thing I would say negatively is not so much them, but the external factors. The way the game was officiated in the second half was ludicrous.
Yeah.
It was ridiculous. And I don't know how much you can see there, but I'm telling you, there were any number of calls. This is what I would reduce it down to. I said this on the Spartan Mag board, but it's honestly captures how I feel about it. Basketball was a contact sport. Okay, that's reality. Everybody knows that. There is contact that is incidental, and there is contact that rises to the level of being a foul, that hinders the opponent from what they should be able to do but for the contact, right?
Yep.
That's it, simply put. Much, I might even say most, of what was called in that second half was the former rather than the latter. And that's where I really, really have a problem with it. I think what happened, point blank, I think what happened is those clowns got caught up with the fact that Michigan State had a foul advantage in the first significant one in the first half. I think they were in the Christ, were they in the double bonus with like 10 minutes to play in the first half? It was something
like
ridiculous.
10-5 or something.
Yeah, it was
yeah.
ridiculous how early they got it. But you know what? I didn't think, I'm not saying they were great on those calls, but they weren't, it wasn't like the second half. The second half, it felt to me like those jokers, subconsciously or consciously, decided that they were going to even things up. And one, that's not reality in the Big Ten. It's not supposed to be. The book, whether you like it or not, and I'm not arguing for this, but the book is home team gets the advantage of the whistle. Didn't happen. Now, you can also say, well, Penn State got rewarded for being the aggressor. Okay, they were aggressive. I don't doubt that. But there's a point where it wasn't that they were driving and, wow, Michigan State just had to foul them and you got to call it. No, it was that there was stuff that shouldn't have ever been called that was drawing the whistle, and it was happening a lot, excessively. And it just kind of it turns the game into something of a joke. I mean, I don't know how it felt in the arena, but watching it, that second half had very little rhythm. Every time Michigan State, this is the weird thing, like you would see Michigan State segments where they'd be up 5, and you'd say, how is this a 5-point game? Because Michigan State and Michigan State was not great, don't get me wrong, but they were playing in such a way that watching it, I just felt they should be up 15.
Yeah, but it felt that way many times.
But Penn State is just continually, it's a parade. They shot 25 free throws in this game. MSU shot 24. I'm sorry, but trying to be as objective as I can be, that did not feel like a game in which that should have happened. With the physical nature of the way it was played by them and the kind of stuff that got called on Michigan State didn't feel that way to me. So, that's it for that. But I think that also did have, unquestionably, had a lot to do with why the game was as tight as it was. Penn State hung in it because they got an extremely favorable second half whistle. And, I understand Mike Rhodes was working those guys for 40 minutes, but he's on the goddamn road and he's Mike Rhodes. And the other guy's Tom Izzo. End of story. That should not happen. So anyway, very disappointing in that regard. I think other positives, Michigan State was in the opportunities they did get from the line were nails again. That's also a huge, when you go 20 for 24 at the line in a 5-point game, well, that was a big factor, right? And then we'll talk about it when we get to the keys, but I thought that those things that add up beyond just the way you shoot. So the number of scoring opportunities you get, turnovers and rebounding, those really cut in Michigan State's favor. And I will also say this, and then I'll turn it back to you. Michigan State was absolutely terrible in terms of its defensive rebounding in the first half, but they were lights out in the second. I think Penn State got 1 offensive rebound in the second half because they ended the game with 8.
Oh, yeah, they had 7 at halftime. Yeah,
they had 7 at halftime.
Yep, you're right.
That now they shot 65%, so that's part of it.
There was many opportunities,
but still, they missed 8 shots. They got 1 of them, so that's what, 15%. That's great work.
Wow, only missing 8 shots and a half. That's amazing.
Yeah, and then add up how many free throw opportunities they had as well. Their percentage, I haven't looked at this, but this will tell me actually. So they were also 13 for 16 at the line. Yeah. So the percentage of chances to score that they scored was remarkable.
Yeah, they were
in that second half.
Got to be kind of crushing for them because, I mean, I'm sure the way they look at it too is that their defense is really bad because to score 85 points on the road, get all those rebounds and have, shoot 65% and still lose, it's got to be sort of depressing.
But the thing is, it's what Michigan State did in those other areas.
Yeah, right.
That when you tattoo somebody on the boards and you have an advantage in turnovers, I mean, Michigan State, so they shot 1 fewer free throw, so that was basically even. Penn State got 53 shots up from the floor, Michigan State got 68. That's a big difference.
Yeah.
Big difference. And that's what allows you to still win a game when you get outshot, substantially. I mean, Michigan State, they got outshot by 6% from the floor and had,
A lot
God,
from three. Yeah.
whatever, 15% from
Yeah.
three.
Right.
And they still won. Well, that's why. And that's
Yeah.
why we talk about it every game.
Yeah.
We talk about finding ways to maximize the scoring chances that you get. That's what the name of the game was in this one. And that's ultimately, if you're going to reduce it to one single thing, to me, that's the thing that got the win. They just had many, many more scoring chances.
Well, let's talk about the player that Michigan State had to keep in the gutter, which was Ace Baldwin, brought to you by the brothers that just do gutters. So my wife reminded me that one of the other problems with your gutters, one thing is you can certainly have problems with junk in your gutters, and so you want to make sure you have leaf guards. But what's really hard for you to personally to clean out are your downspouts, and they can get full of stuff too. I actually, my first son's house, I went and cleaned out, got a bunch of like walnut stuck in it or something like that. His house, I think squirrels. Anyway, I had to basically take the gutters down, the downspouts off in order to clean them out. So it's something I did appreciate doing. And so anyway, you want to have the brothers just do gutters, they'll do that for you. They'll also fix the downspouts if you have any sort of issue with them or the gutters. So obviously put leaf gutters on so you don't have to problems with stuff getting stuck with the downspouts. They will come out even in this weather. Yes, it's freezing cold, but I guess they'll still get out there on the ladders and fix things. Right now, it's better to take care of it now when they're not busy. So you could still get 10% off. You mentioned Final Four when you get your estimate. You can do that at our support page of the Final Four. It's not theschedule.com/support. So as I mentioned, Ace Baldwin was the player Michigan State to keep in the gutter. He was a questionable even earlier today, whether he was going to play or not. He had that back injury that he suffered in the Illinois game, missed the last game against Oregon. He played all 40 minutes. He actually never even sat down. I think that's probably partially because he couldn't, with that back injury, you worry about it tightening up and stuff
I'd go a lot heavier than partially.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So he was not kept in the gutter. It's interesting because if you look at the splits, he probably was neutralized in the first half largely. He finished the game with 4 for 8 from the field, 1 for 4 from 3-point range, 11 for 12 from the line. He was he was at the line the entire second half. Finished with 20 points, had 3 rebounds, 9 assists, 6 turnovers, no steals, no blocks. But at halftime he only had 7 points. He's 2 for 5 from the field, had that 1-3, 2 free throws, 4 assists, and I think he had most of his turnovers in the first half. Most of them, I don't have the splits for the turnovers, but anyway. He obviously was above his scoring average and well, this is a question, did they do a pretty good job defending him? Not great. Definitely in the first half, I thought they did, but the second half, he was at least able to turn the corner enough to get to the basket to force the officials that oftentimes call a foul one way or the other. So, hats off to him for that, I suppose.
What you saw was a veteran player who took advantage of freshmen as good as they are defensively and did not let opportunities go by the boards to draw contact. Now, I said there were a lot of bad calls, and he was the beneficiary of some of them, but some of them he wasn't. Not every foul call was a bad call. I remember there was one he had Jace Richardson just kind of turned sideways. He wasn't in legal guarding position, but he wasn't going to get called for anything unless Baldwin initiated the play, and he did. He saw he had him in a bad spot, and he forced the contact, drew the foul. He did that to Fears as well. I mean, Michigan State, they had 3 guys end that game with 4 fouls. That's the first time all year that's happened. Previously, there had only been one other game where they had as many as 2 guys finish with 4 fouls. I don't think they've had anybody foul out this year. I'd have to go back and confirm that, but I don't think
so.
they have. It's been one of the strengths that nobody really talks about very much. We've mentioned it a few times, but we probably should mention it more than we do, that they've been able to defend as well as they have without fouling.
Yeah.
It's an unusual thing for Tom Izzo teams. Normally, Tom Izzo teams, even the great defensive teams, tend to foul a decent amount. This one has not. But in this game, that didn't happen. Now, again, a lot of it was, frankly, bullshit. but some of it and some of the ones Baldwin drew were the result of a veteran kind of taking a younger player to the woodshed a little bit. And it got better, I thought, late in that game where they started to limit him a little bit, at least, was when Jaden Akins got put on him. They were trying to stay away from that, I think, because like they felt they needed Jaden against, Penn State has some wings with a little more size.
Yeah, right.
And I think they wanted Jaden available for that. But at a certain point, you just had to say, hey, we got to have somebody limit this guy. You can't say, obviously, you can't say 20 points, 9 assists. You can't say Michigan State shut him down. I will say this. Now, he's a turnover prone guy. Like he averages 8 assists a game, but he's also up, I think, near 4 turnovers a game. So he's a guy they asked to do a ton, and he makes some mistakes as part of that. But to force 6 turnovers from him, and several of those were steals.
Yeah.
That's good stuff. So they didn't let him completely do what he wants. So give Michigan State a little bit of credit, but then cutting the other way. I don't know how much you could see, but every time he wasn't on the floor, so this is every huddle, presumably at halftime before the game, he was wearing some kind of brace apparatus that I don't know. I'm assuming it also was providing some kind of signal as well to stimulate something. That's what it sounded like they were describing. But regardless, he was wearing that all, and you saw him again. I don't know how much of this was visible. There were a couple times in the first half where he took hard falls. And actually, one came early in the second half, come to think of it. And you could see him grimace.
Okay.
But he just kept going. Yeah. So I thought he got the benefit of some strange calls, but that doesn't diminish my respect for that kid because he was clearly nowhere near what he normally is physically. And yet he went out and put on that kind of performance and almost got them to the finish line. And by the way, they desperately needed it because Puff Johnson did something to his hand and went out early in that game, never came back. So they were down a starter pretty much, I'll say 80% of the game.
Yeah.
As it was. So they really, if they had been without, if Baldwin couldn't have gone, this thing would have gotten loose in a hurry, I think.
Yeah, sure.
So hats off to him. That was one of the guttier performances you're ever going to see from an opponent. And it was almost enough, not quite.
All right, so let's talk about who cleans the glass best. Brought to you by the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids, who obviously clean glass better than anyone else. If you're in the Grand Rapids area, Kalamazoo area, contact the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. They can clean your windows. They can, even at this time of year, they can go in the inside, obviously, do the windowsills, the screens, all the parts that you don't want to do. And they get up in the ladders, so you don't have to do that. They can power wash as well. And they do some interior painting. So if you need a room or two taken care of inside your house, contact the Squeegee Squad. They can do that. Super nice professionals, great pricing. And also, as a listener to the show, you get 15% off. So you can't lose. So call them today. You can get find ways to get an estimate from them by clicking on our support page at tffinots.com/support. And there, just click on the link. 15% off. You mentioned Final Four when you get your estimate. So this is a very interesting game. So we've had, from a rebounding standpoint, we both just totally whiffed on all our choices. It was 6-6 going in. Now you're up 7-6 because you picked Kohler and Sapala, who had 6-1, not great for 7. They had as much as Frankie Fiddler, but I had Cooper, who had 5, and then Carr had a big 0. So
I will quote the great Al Davis: "Just win, baby."
Yeah. So I got 3 in a row.
Style,
and 3 in a row.
No style points here. I'll take the win. I think this was a great move to switch to this. This
suddenly
format.
You're a big fan of this. I
know I've become an advocate.
But you know what? To your point about the just win, in some ways, this was a game we worried about just because of the big Illinois game coming up.
Yeah,
and, it's ugly. Whatever, you got the win, and so as my dad would always say, you'd rather be up by 10 than down by 10, and you'd rather be 15-2 than 14-3, and 6-0 instead of 5-1.
The last time I checked, There's no column in the Big Ten standings for style points.
No.
So if you have a game like this, okay, you you did some things pretty poorly. You hopefully learned from it. There are teaching moments, but man, if you get away with winning a game like that, just take it and run. And that's I'm sure Tom Izzo's mindset. He's going to be laying into them,
Yeah.
and rightly so, because I'll tell you this, they've got to do a massively better job in terms of handling screening action on Sunday, because
Oh, yeah.
Illinois is a team that shoot, just to preview that for a second, they shoot a boatload of threes. Now they're inconsistent in how well they shoot them, but they shoot a boatload of threes and they run generally really good action to get those open shots. And so Michigan State is going to have to be vastly sharper than they were in this game. But, you mentioned the trap game stuff, and we talked about it, right? Like, I
Yeah.
thought the talk around that having to do with the Northwestern game was off the mark, and I think that proved to be the case. Michigan State did not treat that casually, and they won the game decisively. This felt much more dangerous to me
Hmm.
because you had a potentially, if they had Baldwin, and they got a pretty good Baldwin in this game, a dangerous enough team that, and Michigan State, with everybody telling them how great they are, and Illinois looming, I worried
Hmm.
about it. Like how
Yeah.
and how much that had to do with, I didn't think Michigan State, well, we'll talk about it in the keys. I didn't think they were sleepwalking
No,
necessarily,
I
but
don't think so.
this was a long, long way from the kind of focused performance we typically see from this group.
Yeah.
So I've got to assume, and also the other thing too is it was the end of a stretch of, I think was it 3 straight games? Well, 2 straight games they played with quick turnarounds. They had
Hmm.
the Thursday game where they'd had some time to prepare
Right.
against Washington, right? And then 2 days for Northwestern, and then 2 days in between games for this one.
Yeah.
So pretty tight turnarounds. When that's the third game in a series like that, where you third game in 6 days,
Yeah.
right? Or 7 days,
Well, I
whatever it
feel like all we've been
was.
doing is recording shows, so they've been playing
Yeah,
pretty much
yeah.
every
Then
day.
then it's not, even though you're at home, I guess it's not totally shocking that you might have the last in that series. You're not quite as, and especially when there are other factors too that are
Yeah.
leading you to that anyway, that you might not be as sharp. I'm not trying to make excuses. This was not a great performance in my
Yeah.
view, but you know,
It's an
they got it
explanation, not an
done.
excuse. Yes,
They right,
absolutely.
exactly.
So the five keys to the game brought to you by Nudge Printing.
So that puts me up 7-6.
Yeah, we don't need to talk
All
about the
right,
score right now.
all
We'll
right,
work it
all
out.
right. I just want to keep that in my head.
Yeah,
All
yeah,
right,
I'm sure. Yeah.
all right.
So Nudge Printing is our sponsor for the show, who provides our apparel, all our logo apparel. They also can get you all sorts of different stuff from Michigan State, whether it's new logos or the old ones, the vintage ones. You can get all that stuff at Nudge Printing on high quality screen printed uh, apparel, whether it's a t-shirt, a hoodie, a quarter zip, a jacket. They've got really cool hats. They got all kinds of stuff. They got stickers for your wall. They've got for your computer, for your cornhole, whatever it might be. You can find it just about everything at Nudge Printing, and it's super high quality. It's all based in Michigan at Portland. And if you've got someone who's not from Michigan State, there's plenty of other schools that you can look at too. So you just go over to Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com. You get 20% off as a listener to the show if you just type in Final Four as one word at checkout. I'd highly recommend you head on over there. You won't regret it. You'll be very glad you got some Nudge Printing stuff. So, first key to the game was Baldwin. I think, kind of went over that. He showed up, so he was there, and so he was
Yeah.
important and critical for them for this game. And Penn State got a good version of him. I don't know. There's much more to say about that. I guess we kind of
Well,
talked about him.
other than just kind of reiterate, I think if he had not played, there's no way this game is tight.
Sure. Yeah.
You
Right.
see, they played well without him and losing narrowly to Oregon at home in their previous game, but I think that was and especially what happened to Puff Johnson. If that had happened and Baldwin had not been able to play, this would have been a 20-point plus blowout. I'm pretty sure of that.
Yeah.
He was that important to what they did. I mean, you
Right.
look at it, you add up the points and assists. He was responsible for, God, figuring that some of those assists were for threes. He was likely responsible for 40 plus points
Yeah. Half their points, half their
individually. Yeah,
offense. Yeah.
yeah,
Right. So
like
then
directly.
talking about transition game. This one we thought Michigan State would have a little more opportunity to do than certainly more than the Northwestern game, just because Penn State likes to play fast. And I thought Michigan State largely did pretty well here. They have 20 fast break points. They give up 14 to Penn State. But they got a lot of action early on. It wasn't
Yep.
until Penn State kind of went to the zone again, even on that it really just kind of threw Michigan State for a loop. I think, especially even in transition, once they got their offense set up or defense set up a little bit. So I don't know, but overall, I think they did an okay job with transition.
It was okay. It was right around their average, maybe slightly above where their average is sitting
Right.
after that Northwestern game. Yeah, 12, I believe 12 of the 20 came in the first half. So you're right, they were better early. But they handled it appropriately. You know what was interesting? We'll talk. Actually, I'll save it. We'll talk about it at another point. How Penn State approached this game, which was interesting, and it was something we had talked about.
Right. So then we come to the third key to the game, which was turnovers. This is
Yeah.
very surprising because I thought, this is a spot we had just assumed Michigan State would have more turnovers and that they'd have to make up extra possessions elsewhere. And they actually did well. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but the turnovers
14-10.
14-10. Yeah. So Michigan State
Yep.
had the edge there. And so anyway, they had a lot of steals. I mentioned Frankie Fiddler had 4 steals himself, but they had more
Yeah.
steals than Penn State, which I don't think we would have expected had had you just known that, you thought, boy, Michigan State was going to win this pretty easily.
Well, so there's an interesting component to this game, and they actually talked about it at one point on the broadcast, and we had mentioned it in our preview. So we wondered, well, Penn State is a team that likes to pressure. They like to trap.
Right.
Would they do it against a team like Michigan State that wants to run, has a lot of good guards, and at least in theory would seem to be the kind of team that could handle that? So that's the first level. The reality is Penn State applied very little pressure.
Right. Which is what we thought. Yeah, exactly. That's what we were thinking before.
So
that might be the case.
That's what they did.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's part of why their steal numbers, their turnover generation numbers were not what they normally are.
Right.
I think it was because they played much more passively. But the interesting thing, and unless Mike Rhodes spoke to it in his post game, we'll never really get an answer, is the why. Because the obvious reason is what we just talked about. Well, they're worried about what Michigan State can do, punish them. I think another reason, frankly, might have been Ace Baldwin.
Not quite up to snuff. He's got back's not good.
You knew if we put him out there, one, because of how important he is to their team, but two, he can't sit down.
Right.
If he sits down, he's running a risk that it's going to start cramping up, so to speak. I'm using a very precise medical term there in case you notice, but you get my point.
My wife's a pediatrician, and I listen to her lectures sometimes, and they mention poop. I'm like, seriously, there's a medical lecture, so pediatricians. But go ahead.
That there would be pain, that his condition would deteriorate if he sat. So he didn't sit. He stood up in all their huddles. I'm assuming he was standing the whole time in the locker room at halftime.
That'd be a good guess, yeah.
And he didn't. And he was out on the floor every minute. So there was that was obviously a very delicate. And he took some hard contact during the game, which couldn't have helped. So all those things kind of combined, and I would think that it might have factored in to their defensive game plan that Mike Rhodes might have figured, I can't ask him to do everything else to try to lead our offense, score, play every minute there is to play, and go full tilt the way we normally do in our pressure game. Just a guess, but I'm assuming that factored in somewhere in that decision. The other things probably were factors too. But I think that was something that maybe led to the decision that they made. That would be
Yeah,
my assumption.
I think that's a reasonable guess. So fourth key to the game is the boards. We had this is another game that we expected Michigan State to. Well, we had hoped that Michigan State would dominate on the defensive boards anyway. They did okay for the final numbers, as you mentioned. They were really good in the second half on the very few misses that Penn State had. They ended up Penn State ended with 32% offensive rebounding rate,
Yeah.
which was probably you hoped they'd be less than that. The one nice thing is Michigan State was very good in the offensive boards. They were 42%, and they also, which we mentioned before, that they seemed like they've had some trouble
Yeah.
converting that. They had 23 second chance points to Penn State 6. I mean, that's obviously a
Huge.
massive difference in the game, and
But
that's largely. I mean, that's obviously more than the margin of victory.
going back to the turnovers as well for a second, it's worth mentioning MSU had a 27-13 advantage in points off turnovers as
Right.
well.
And
So
again, you wouldn't have expected that generally. You know,
this was a game where it was won by Michigan State in those areas, those possession altering areas.
Yeah.
Obviously, look, anytime you clear 40% on the offensive boards, you've done good work. I don't care who you're playing against. And Penn State as a defensive rebounding team is not great. They're mediocre. So to do that again, it wasn't like we were facing a sub 300 defensive rebounding team.
Right.
So that was a really good effort from MSU. And you mentioned Frankie with 4 was just phenomenal. But they got 3 out of Jackson, which is not a surprise. 2 out of Carson Cooper, which is not a huge surprise, and then 3 team rebounds and a few scattered ones here and there for other guys. But Frankie's were obviously hugely important because they came at a critical time in the game.
Yeah.
And to see him convert those, hey, that was a big deal. So hats off there. The defensive rebounding, as I say, that first half was really, really rough. It was another performance where you're like, what is, because Penn State's mediocre on the offensive boards too.
Right. Yeah.
And they played a lot of that half without their big kid who was in foul trouble. And they still got a lot done. They were out rebounding Michigan State in terms of offensive rebounding percentage at halftime. They were up. The second half, it went entirely the other direction, as we said. They only got 1 offensive rebound in the second half. They could say, well, they made a lot of shots. True. But they were 1 offensive rebound with 8 on 8 misses. That's doing great work. And it probably, in part, saved the game. Because if Michigan State had given up offensive rebounds to Penn State at the rate they were in the first half, they would have at least had more chances. In a 5-point game, that's only 2 scoring chances, and you could be tied or down even. So it mattered. So I'll give Michigan State credit for the second half performance. Big negative in the first half. It added up to kind of a mediocre game below that, but this has been trending now for a few games. We mentioned it in the preview, right? That it seems like the turnover problem that ship has been steadied lately. Now it's the defensive rebounding's turn to kind of hit, not a crisis, but heading in a direction you don't want, and heading into a game on Sunday where they're going to get tested for real. So let's hope that second half is good enough that it carries over into that Illinois game, because it's going to matter in that one.
Yeah, you kind of put a finger in a hole in the dike, and then a new one springs somewhere else.
Well, it's the ebb and flow of a season,
Yeah, that's just sort of the way it goes, and it's why you try and tighten that all up so it's all buttoned up by the time you hit the postseason, right? You saw the seniors, both Akins and Fiddler, really take over in that second half, where you had Fiddler had 5 of his 7 rebounds in the second half. Jaden had 4 of his 6 in the second half. They really, clamping down both on the offensive defensive end on that second half, those 2 guys especially.
Yep.
So the final, and we've talked about this to a decent amount, is just the focus or concern about the trap game here with Illinois coming up on Sunday. And I think the one thing I would say about this game is, Michigan State was not sharp. I think that's, if there's one thing I would just describe them as not sharp. I never felt like they were being out physical, like they didn't get punked. It wasn't like they didn't bring enough energy. Maybe the first, 2 minutes of the second half, they kind of came a little sleepy. Penn State rattled off an 8-0 run or something to get it down to 2 or whatever it was. And they definitely look like, oh, they just kind of got shocked. But that was about the only time I felt like they just kind of looked like they were out of it. I don't know what your
Well,
feeling is.
I mostly agree. I would say this though, you know, the damage a zone can do against you is by turning you passive,
Hmm.
and that means your energy level can get kind of bled out a little bit, right? And I do think that in segments of the game, that's what happened to Michigan State, where they had trouble dissecting it as well as they would have liked to. And I think that led to an overall passivity
Yeah.
for segments, not the whole game, but for segments of the game that did not do them any favors. And, again, it's kind of, it's frustrating because I don't think it was a particularly great zone.
No.
It just, there were opportunities there. That's an easier zone to dissect than others you will see, in my opinion.
Yeah, I
That
thought
was
they could get
pretty
in the
much
lane pretty easily, or
it
even
was
from the
pretty much
corners.
the gap was there. The
Yeah.
gap was there. It was a matter of them moving the ball and men moving to occupy the right space that was not happening with as much pace as you would have liked to have seen. And that resulted in them getting late shot clock more frequently than we typically see. It's
Hmm.
a funny game. Like, it felt to me that Michigan State was forced to play slowly a lot, and yet they get 68 shots up and 24 free throw attempts.
Yeah.
So a ton of scoring chances. Like, that's normally, and
Well, they
if you
scored 90
see
points. Yeah.
those, right, scored 90 points. So you see those numbers, you feel like, oh, they were playing racehorse basketball at times, but not consistently. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I look, I think that it's, I watch a game like that and get irritated by a lot of it. And then I have to remind myself it's a long season
Yeah.
and there are ebbs and flows every year. No team that you've ever watched at Michigan State has painted Picasso's 100% of the time, right? It doesn't work that way. And to have a game where you felt like, boy, you really didn't play that well, and you still win it against a team that I think probably feels they did a lot right, and you still won, that's okay.
Yeah.
You know, that's okay.
Yeah.
So
I agree. And
it's
compared to last year, I feel like, these are games that Michigan State lost last year and they're winning them
oh,
this year.
there's no question.
Right.
There's no
So
question.
that's the difference. So like again, you're 15-2, and then I think last year we could have been like 10-7 right now. We're talking, and we're talking, well, hoping for a 10 seed or something, or 8 seed or something like that.
Well,
And
look, it's important to note a couple of things just to put into no guarantees of where this ends up, but to put it into a little bit of perspective what they've done. So this is a 10-game win streak, I think,
correct.
now
Yep.
overall.
Hmm.
That's the longest one they've had since 2018,
Hmm.
2017-18 season. It's the first time they've been 6-0 in the league since the next year after that, 2018-2019. That one ended up in a Big Ten championship and a Final Four. Now, again, and there was a graphic during the game of teams that had started 5-0 in Tom Izzo's tenure. I believe all of them had gone to Final Fours, I think, except ironically, that and most people probably don't remember this season started off 5-0, the 2021-22 team, which
Oh
got to
yeah.
the round of 32. But that team had a really good start to Big Ten play and then just hit the skids and kind of struggled from there, was not great most of the year, especially at the end. And and then they won a tournament game against Foster Lawyer and Company, and then got beat
Right.
by Duke, I think, in the second
Play
round.
close, but yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
So yeah, so no guarantees of anything, but it does help put into perspective that at least in terms of some of this stuff, this team is doing the types of things that tend to be signifiers of good things to come, of a good Michigan State team that is capable of contending for a title, going on a run in March. We'll see where all that adds up. You can still rightly say, based on the numbers, the way they sit and look today, that they have not played a particularly strong schedule. I mean, I'm trying to think now. Have they played anybody with a winning record in the league? I don't think
Nope.
they have.
No.
Okay, so everybody they've played, all six, are sub 500 in the league. Now, um, it's still early enough that you don't know yet what that really adds up to. It's also worth noting that half of those wins are on the road, and I would argue any win over any team on the road in the Big Ten is a meaningful one.
Yeah.
So when you're 3-0, that's real, no matter who you beat. And again, as we've talked about, the margins have been largely impressive in doing that. 2 double-digit wins, and the other one was by 7. So, I think that you have to be feeling reasonably good about where this team is, but like Tom Izzo is harping on, they got a long, 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 long way to go. They haven't really done anything meaningful yet. That's all true. And on Sunday, now the narrative changes. Now you're facing a team that is plus 500. They got their best player back, and he played very well in his first game back after missing a few. They're going to present a real challenge. But do I think Michigan State is up to winning that game? And frankly, if they play their brand of basketball we see most of the year, should win it at Breslin? Absolutely. But we're going to start finding out. I mean, this is the first of many, 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 many more tests of that caliber to come. They're going to see Michigan twice. They're going to see Purdue. They're going to go to Illinois. They're going to have teams like Wisconsin and IU, who's not very good, but you get my drift. There's going to be Oregon. Those teams are going to come in. They got to go out west to face USC and UCLA, and now it's kind of a toss-up as to which of those teams represents the tougher matchup at the moment. I still think it's UCLA, by the way, but the records wouldn't tell you that. So there's a lot more of these challenges, obviously, to come that are going to sort out exactly what this team is. But, we've said this a few times. All you can do is play the games that get put in front of you. I don't believe in apologizing for a schedule or any of that nonsense. And the fact is, for the most part, tonight may be a bit of an exception. But for the most part, MSU has done what they're supposed to do against teams that they're better than. They've blasted them.
Yeah.
Tonight was not a blasting, but they still got the win when they were maybe a little subpar. That's not such a bad thing.
Well, I think we'll leave it there because we're going to be back in probably tomorrow or the day after with the preview for Illinois. These games just keep coming pretty quick over this last 8 or 9 day stretch here. Just a reminder, too, to check out our support page at the Final Four on the schedule.com/support. There you can find ways to support the show financially, which we really appreciate. Those of you who support the show either on a one-time basis on PayPal or Venmo, or on a recurring basis on Patreon or Substack. So I guess we'll leave it there, and we'll see you in a little bit. So until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go green.